Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kevin Askew, Senior Sales Manager of Programmer's Paradise. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, part of our free webinar series, Maximizing Data Quality for Value and ROI. Today's session, CA ERwin R8 and Crystal Reports. Today's agenda will include brief intro on Programmer's Paradise, followed by the webinar hosted by Victor Rodriguez, Database Modeling Consultant at Programmer's Paradise. We will end things today with a Q&A session. Programmer's Paradise is a leading e-seller of developer and infrastructure tools. We can be found on the web at www.programmers.com. CA ERwin falls under our database worldview ecosystem. Programmer's Paradise is the #1 data modeling reseller for CA in North America. We also have a dedicated sales and engineering team on staff that focuses on modeling and infrastructure design and training service. Under our industry-leading tools for your end-to-end database needs, including database platform, design and modeling, development and testing, management and administration, deployment and migration, performance monitoring and tuning, and reporting and mining. Our on-demand sessions can be found at www.programmers.com/CA. I will now turn things over to Victor to start today's webinar. Victor?
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody, for joining once again. Just taking control of the presentation now. And today's topic we're going to be covering is ERwin R8 and Crystal Reports. As many of you may already be familiar, starting back in ERwin 7.3, Crystal Reports did become bundled with the software, and we're going to kind of see that integration and kind of some best practices around that and what we can expect to just kind of get you started, kind of get our toes wet in the area of using the two tools together. And we're going to explore some topics here today. So I introduced Crystal Reports briefly. There's going to be a lot of demonstrations today, so we're going to kind of cover this initial material pretty quickly. Then we're going to show you how you can publish your reports right bundled inside of ERwin and how tightly bundled between the two of them. If you're using ERwin 7.3 in the past, you're going to see that in R8, the interface is much more tightly integrated, the two tools. We're going to explore the CA ERwin metadata, and the metadata is the access, is the method that which Crystal Reports actually gets at the data within the model tools. And we'll show you how you can interact with that and kind of an overview and some good resources for navigating around that and getting at that metadata. Then we're going to build your first ERwin ODBC query. I'll show you how you do that within the ERwin software itself. There's kind of like a sandbox in there for you to develop in. And then we're going to build that Crystal report using that ODBC query that we've built previously. And then we're also going to look at other methods of extracting the metadata for reporting purposes. And then a Q&A to wrap things up. So hopefully we'll leave enough time for the Q&A at the end, but there is a lot of demonstration today, so we'll see how tight that ends up being. So Crystal Reports. Crystal Reports is a industry-leading reporting tool. It gives you access to many different types of just about any kind of data source you can possibly imagine. So you can use the tool not only in the context of ERwin, the demonstration we're going to see today, but since this developer version of Crystal Reports is bundled with the ERwin software, you can use it with any of your other kind of data reporting needs that you may need. And we'll kind of see in the context of ERwin how you can start delving into your metadata and then kind of use that as a springboard for maybe other projects you have as well. Like one method that you may want to start using the Crystal Reports would be to just look at the model manager metadata, for example. And I'll kind of touch on that briefly, although it's something we'll probably cover in a more advanced Crystal Reports session in the future. But just kind of start thinking in the back of your mind, how can I use Crystal Reports outside of the box, thinking around not just the ERwin software, but like actually accessing all these different data sources and then starting to use this functionality to use that tool to kind of generate reports that can be kind of cross-source analysis. So the Crystal Reports tool within the ERwin software itself is accessible from tools, and then you'll notice that there's a whole section there on reporting, including the Crystal Reports developer, which is the full development tool, but then also just pinned reports that can be run right inside of ERwin, and I'll show you how you can do that a little later during the demonstration. And then you also see there's recent reports that are available there, model manager reports. There are canned model manager reports that you can run right from within ERwin. And then there's also the ability of generating a current diagram picture, and I'll discuss that a little further. But that does also tie in with the ODBC client for the ERwin software itself. So I want to introduce a couple of resources here. My blog, maximumdatamodeling.blogspot.com, and I don't mention it just for the purposes of promoting myself, but actually my most recent post, and I'll actually show you this now. My most recent post here actually has to do with building your Irwin ODBC query. So it actually ties in very tightly with this. And for example, some of the paths to some of the resources I'm going to mention are actually right here on the blog itself. So please do, at some later point, come back to this point and kind of as a follow-up or an addendum to what the material will be kind of covering here within the webinar itself. In addition to that, we have in the doc folder, so this is in the program file, CA ERwin Data Modeler R8 doc folder, you're going to find two really useful documents here. One is the Irwin metadata or meta model reference, and this is going to basically be the full documentation of the Irwin metadata. And then there's also an ODBC reporting guide, and this ODBC reporting guide is also really useful for just navigating the ODBC editor itself. There's also some really useful canned reports in there that you can run, and we'll be doing that during the demonstration to kind of show you how all these different pieces speak to each other. There's also a very useful piece of information. This is something that people requested in the past, and it's a relational model of all the metadata inside or within the structure of the schemas of the ODBC client itself. So you can actually see all the schemas that are feeding that ODBC client software. And then lastly, probably my favorite is the Irwin SPY. If you've ever attended my previous webinars on using the API, I say that Irwin SPY is like probably the best resource for all of this. It's very easy to navigate. Open any model and start navigating and looking at exactly what properties you're looking in the context of other properties. You can see the structure of those objects, etc. This is equally valid for in the context of what we're going to be doing today. Even though we're looking at an ODBC interface rather than an API interface, the metadata is the same, the properties are the same, and the syntax is going to be similar. So there are going to be 6 schemas we're going to be looking at, and I'll be showing you that in just a moment as well. So what are the 6 schemas? The M0 schema is the modeling data. This is primarily, when you look at the exercises that come included in the documentation that I pointed to previously, they are pretty much referencing this M0 level of the data. And this is the modeling data. So this is really like all the metadata relating to your model. And this is going to make a little more sense when I actually go into the tool in just a moment. Then there's an EM0 metadata, and this is extended metadata for the M0 level. And now basically what this gives you, these are actually materialized views, and what they actually give you is access to a slightly simplified version of what you're seeing at the M0 level. So for example, at the M0 level, there'll be a table called attribute, and it will have all the attribute properties within it. But in the EM0 level, what you'd find is a materialized view that would, for example, have your physical properties in one view versus logical properties in another. So it makes your querying a little bit easier. Also, anything that's specific to like database properties that are a little hard to understand within the context of the M0 schema are actually created like within like a different context in EM0. So it's kind of separated a little bit more. You see that physical view objects in one view, logical view objects in another. Then we have the M1 level metadata, and what that is now this is your metadata. So this is metadata about your metadata in a way. So what you can imagine that is like model properties. So from the context of what you'd be using day to day, probably the thing you'd be looking for the most there are UDPs. So if you created UDPs, they actually exist at the M1 level. But for the most part, you are you're going to be looking at the M0 level. However, there are some objects at the M1 level. For the purposes of this demonstrations we're going to be looking at today, primarily we're at the M0 level, but I just kind of want to mention that like you may in the future be saying, okay, I was looking for a model property, like what is the setting for a default value within the context of my model? I'd like to know what that is. And if you'd like to see that, then you can look at that at the M1 level, and so you can explore that on your own. And then there's the EM1 level. So just like we described at the EM0 level, this EM1 level extends the M1 metadata. And for example, it contains database properties. So once again, that already exists at the M1 level, but it's a little hard to understand because this is very generic database properties. At the EM1 level, you would see specific Teradata, like a column for Teradata properties, a column for Oracle properties, SQL Server, etc. So it makes it a little easier to navigate. The AL schema contains all of your action log information, so you can actually run queries, for example, to see like what objects did I delete in this session, what objects have I added within the context of the session, renames, etc. So there's the ability of actually having that in the action log, and you can run these reports, something that has not been available in the past. Now, all of these, by the way, exist already at this point in your Irwin 7.3. So, and I think it began at one of the 7.2 versions where this was first introduced. So anybody who's even back on those earlier versions, you can already start exploring this if you're curious. However, this DGM schema, which is will generate the diagram image. This schema did not exist in 7.x, so if you look for it, you're not going to find it. It's new to 8.0, but this is actually what allows you to generate a diagram on demand within the context of a report. So I'll touch on that briefly, but it's probably something we'll look at in much more detail in the future. But just to let you know that if you're looking at this from the context of the 7.x software, you're looking at 5 schemas, not 6. And one last thing I want to mention here within the context of this, there is a translation function. So for example, in Irwin, if all of you who are familiar with Irwin out there have probably noticed that in the past, a physical column name will actually be mapped from a logical name. Like there's a rule that you're imposing on it. Maybe the domain has a particular rule that is using a lookup file or using your naming standards or using some concatenated string to define. And if you actually run the report on that property, what you see is the rule. You do not see the actual string. And what this tran function allows you to do, and we'll actually demonstrate this and make it much more clear for everybody out there, the tran function actually allows you to simply do the transformation, so you don't have to manually make the modification. You can just let the tool translate this Irwin value to a string that is easy to read and understand. So here's some basics about the metadata access. There is a query tool that's available from Tools, Query Tool, in both tools, whether you're using 7.3 or 8.0. And this tool actually allows you to run ODBC queries. And the nice thing about it is you can run it against the Irwin, obviously, but you can also run it against any other ODBC client you have out there. So for example, if you reverse engineered an environment and you want to actually see the graphic in the background while you query the data via the ODBC query, feel free to do so. There's no reason you can't do that. In the context of our descriptions today, we're talking about from the metadata access in Irwin. There are going to be 2 clients you're going to find. One is called Irwin R8 Current, and the other one's going to be called Irwin R8. If you're using 7.3, these are going to be called Irwin Current and Irwin. You're not going to see the R8 in there. If you have both tools installed, if you see the ones without the R8, one with the R8, that's just the differentiators between the R8 client and the non-R8 client. So these are your data source names for the ODBC client for Irwin R8 Current and Irwin R8. The difference between the two behaviors, Irwin R8 Current is the diagram that is currently open, while Irwin R8 will allow users from a pop-up menu to select which model they'd like to run the report against any models that are currently open. So if you have 10 models opened in your Irwin session, you can actually navigate to which exact diagram you'd like to run against. The ODBC client in Irwin allows you to create and save, or I should say the tool, the editor allows you to create and save your queries. They're saved as QRY files that can be opened within Irwin or from other ODBC clients as well, also support that file format. And then you can also, actually, once you've run the report, you can save that as a CSV file. So here is a screenshot of my data source name editor. And you'll see that I have listed there Irwin Current. These are simply my open access ODBC clients for the 7.3 software. And I also have Irwin R8 and Irwin R8 Current, which are the new clients. So the ODBC driver gives us read-only access to within the base product. You'll be able to do select statements, for example, but that's all that's supported currently. There is no insert. So anybody who's curious to know if you can actually use the same editor to modify data, you can't do that, but there is a bulk editor in the R8 software which will kind of allow you to do that bulk editing. That's something for a different topic, but to just let you know that exists. But from the context of the ODBC editor, there is no ability of running insert statements, for example. This is select only. It allows you to generate reports based on the metadata in your models. You can turn this on or turn this off by, for example, sometimes users may actually, by default it's turned on, but some users may actually want to disable this feature. So you can go to your Tools, Options, there's an Integrations tab, and you can actually just disable the ODBC connection there. Also, if your ODBC client does not seem to be running, you can enable it here as well. But by default, it will be running once you launch Irwin. What else do we need to speak of here? The ODBC query reporting allows you to, you can run these same queries into any ODBC supported tool. So for example, Excel, if you want to add a data source via Excel, you can do that. You can run the exact same queries that you build in Irwin into Excel. These other tools as well, like Pentaho, Logia XML, and Cognos, of course, and then, of course, Crystal Reports, which we'll be going to be covering in more detail in just a moment. And you do not need any kind of separate database or repository to run these. This is purely, you're running it right against the Irwin metadata itself. The database, for all intents and purposes, is the open model. So I'm going to actually show you some of the abilities within the ODBC-based metadata demo right now, and we're going to create a query, execute it. We're going to show you how you can run that against a database too, or the method of doing so, and then using that against the Irwin ODBC, and then saving the results set as a CSV file. So I'm just switching over to my Irwin. Okay. And let me zoom out here. So the first thing I want to introduce, actually, what I've actually opened here is I've actually opened the metadata that I was speaking to, that model within our repository that contains our metadata definitions. So let's take a look at our column display here. And I have my entity and attribute tables open. And let me just move this out of the way and just show you some of the properties here. There's a lot of properties here. Obviously, this contains all of the metadata information for these, for the properties themselves, for the entities and for the attributes. And you can see there's a lot of different metadata that can be referenced here. And there's actually a join occurring across these two tables, and it's on this index here, where the entity ID is actually mapping to the attribute owner. So that's the relationship between these two tables. Now, you can actually just first, let me show you where you can actually open this from. This, once again, is on my blog, and it's also in the earlier slide. But you would open this from your install folder. It's going to be in Program File, CA Irwin Data Modeler R8, in the Backup Files folder, in Samples. So in the Samples folder, you're going to find this model, Irwin Relational Meta Model. And that model is this model, which actually allows us to see all of the objects in at the metadata level. So these are all the metadata that we can actually run reports against. Now, it's nice to see it within the relational context. Like, for example, here, this is pretty straightforward. You can imagine, like, we see our entities and attributes, pretty simple to assume a relationship between those two, but it actually allows you to create much more complex reports. I'm actually going to build a, I've actually built a bulk editor report here to show you all of these different levels of the schema that I was mentioning before. And the way I did this was I just used the new bulk editor tool here, and I selected, for example, my tables and my views, because some of these objects are actually views. And I included the owner property, because I want to see the schema owners. That's what I kind of want to point out in this context for all object types. And I just included the owner and the object names. So I just click the edit button. This compiles the report here. So let's go back and review what I described before at the schemas that we mentioned. So the AL schemas, these are the ones that give us reports on our activity log, so we can see what objects have been modified, deleted, what properties have changed, and what objects have been created. Here's the DGM schema object. It's the only one. It's current_diagram, and this is what allows you to actually generate a graphical report within the context of a report by querying this table at any time. It generates a graphic that you can embed in any report that you're generating. This is only in R8, by the way, so in 7.3 you would not see that. The M0 schema here is the one that we're really going to be looking at for the context of most of the reports today. And this really contains all of my model properties. So you can see if I scroll through here, you'd expect to see most of this. Abstract object is something that is not pretty straightforward when you think about it, but most of these are models, entity properties, attribute properties, domains, validation rules, key groups or indexes in the context of a physical environment, the members of the key group, and then database properties, Oracle table spaces, rollback segments, Informix properties, et cetera, and so forth. So aside from these database-specific properties, you're really looking at these pretty straightforward. You have models, entities, attributes, domains, validation rules, and key groups. So that's the MO schema, and we're still going through these with all of these different database properties. And then we also have the EM0 schema level, and this is those materialized views I was describing where you actually start seeing like where I have my physical attribute properties and my logical attribute properties. So some users may actually prefer to work via the materialized views rather than via the M0 schema level. That's really up to your preference. I actually prefer to use the M0 level because it just gives me access to much more metadata, and once you get familiar with it, you prefer to have more options than fewer, obviously. The M1 level, I'm just going to introduce briefly. We're not really going to touch on it that much right now, and this is a little more advanced, but it's the data about the metadata we're looking at. So, for example, there might be table properties you want to look at. Is this table displayed or not? Are there, can I define, are there UDPs that have been defined for a particular object level, et cetera? Anything that's at the model level can be queried within the context of the M1 schema. There's also an EM1 schema, which I'll show you when we scroll. Let me actually filter here so I can show you EM1. Here we go. And so here at the EM1 schema level, you'll see that all of these extended M1 levels are basically, it's taking the same M1's properties I was just introducing a moment before, but it's actually seeing them specifically to databases. So it allows you to segregate the way you want to look at these. Of course, these will only be populated if you have, for example, the Oracle properties are only going to exist on models that have Oracle targets, or the values will only be populated in that context, obviously. But once again, if you want to have specific queries against it, and you're looking just at the database properties rather than going against that maybe sometimes convoluted M1 schema level, you can use the EM1 schema level. So that's at a very high level. I'm trying to introduce the metadata. If you read the documentation that's included, there's also a video, which I forgot to mention before. Also in the doc folder, there's a videos folder, subfolder, that contains a video that introduces this topic as well. And definitely read up on that. It's a very useful resource. So this is at a very high level, introducing the metadata. And I'm trying to give you like a very high, like a bird's eye view of what we're going to be doing. But now let's take a look at some practical examples that are a little easier to understand. So first of all, let's actually generate a report. So, that's what we would like to do. So let's see how we do that. It's pretty easy to do here in the Irwin software. This is just a good old handy-dandy eMovies model. It's been updated for R8, but for them, we have the same type of object, so it just looks a little different than it has in the past, taking advantage of some of the new layout features in Irwin R8. So let's generate a few different reports here. I'm going to just generate one of these pinned reports. I'm going to do the current diagram membership physical. So this will be a physical report, including a graphical component and the objects in that report. And it just take a moment for this to come up. And it may have come up here in the background. Not yet, actually. Here we go. It's just building it now. And there we go. So we have the graphical report that we just saw in the previous screen. And in addition to that, and we can actually navigate to it here, we also have our entity and view members. So here's now this is a pretty straightforward, simple report where we're looking at the objects here. Now, as far as publishing this, there's a few different options here. One is, of course, if you save this as a report template, or not report template, but as a Crystal report, you can actually open this using Crystal Reports Viewer. Crystal Reports Viewer is a free tool via the Crystal Reports website, and just like Adobe Reader is free, it's free as well. So if you do decide to keep this format, your users can simply install the new Crystal Reports Viewer to navigate around it. More convenient maybe is the ability of exporting this as a PDF file, for example. You can also save it as an RTF if you want to open it in Word. PDF, of course, if you want to open it in the Adobe Acrobat Reader. So two very convenient methods of publishing this. There's also the ability to publish to HTML, which I'm just going to tease you with right now, but I'll show you how to do that. In a little bit later in the presentation. So let's generate another one of these pinned reports. We're going to go to our pinned report here. I'm going to now generate a logical physical combined dictionary. And I do want to show you this one because there is something nice about this, which is going to be different than you've seen in previous reporting tools, is the ability of you have this interactive editor. So what I get prompted with is actually which subject areas would I like to include. So I can actually say, okay, I just want these two subject areas. You can also use wildcards to identify which subject areas you'd like. You can specify what order you'd like to see them in. So it could be like physical order and column order, alphabetical order. Now, the nice thing is, you do have to build this logic. I mean, this comes canned with Irwin, so right out of the box, you're going to be seeing these reports in there. But what I'm going to show you a little later on is how you can actually build on the logic that's being used here. So if you wanted to have the ability of generating a report on demand and giving your end user the ability of searching on subject areas, specifying the order that they'd like to see the results generated in, you can actually just customize or update this existing report to get the results you'd like. So I'm just going to click OK here. And this is generating the report now, and there we go. So what we have here is a list of the different subject areas. So here's my model name, my subject area name, and these are groups that we've created here, and I'll show you how that works within the context of Crystal a little bit later as well. And then, of course, we have our definitions been included, and then the attributes, their definitions, the properties on those attributes. So a very nicely formatted report here. Here's the customer subject area and all its members. And here's the movie format subject area and all its members as well. So you can see the advantage of generating something in this format is that it gives you the flexibility of generating something like this. Now this is a canned report, but there's no reason that we can't develop off of this and add more features to it. So I'm actually going to step back into the presentation now. I just wanted to introduce that initially, how to generate those and how to build that. And actually, you know what? I wanted to show you I guess I'm going to be introducing you to the query tool as well. Actually, let me show you the slides before we actually get into the editors. So what I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment is the way to access the query tool itself. So let's say that you like the pinned reports, you like the ability that Crystal Reports gives you, but you want to start building your own metadata reports. How can I start to do that from scratch? So probably the first thing you want to do is get familiar with the query tool inside of Irwin, and we're going to see the editor in just a moment. But the way that editor works is that you have this interactive editor up top. You see the upper section where you can actually write your query and the results set down below. You can also export that result set as a CSV file. Now, the nice thing about this editor is that you'll notice there that there's this color coding that kind of you expect when you've worked with any kind of SQL development tools, that it was like context specific. It'll identify what a string is. It'll identify valid syntax. It'll identify your keywords based on the different color coding, and it allows you to build that report. And then, of course, on the fly, actually report to make sure that the query, the result set is what you expect it to be. So let's take a look at that functionality. So the query editor comes from, it's also from the tools menu, query tool. If you have 7.3, you already have this available as well. Now, this actually gives you the ability, in this query tool, you can actually connect to the open model just by clicking this button here, connect to Irwin ODBC, or you can connect to a database. If I select connect to database, I actually can connect to any data source that I have defined previously. So it's a really nice feature. Like I mentioned before, you can actually connect to the database that you have modeled back here and then run a query while you're looking at the joined objects and everything. So it's a very useful little tool to have. But in this context, we actually want to generate a report against our metadata. So we're going to connect to the current model just by clicking this button here. And now we're connected. We can disconnect by clicking this one here, but it's the connect button. Let's find a query to run. The query I'm going to run actually is, now this is back to that initial slide where I showed you where you can actually find the ODBC reporting guide. This is in the doc folder right in the installation where you have Irwin installed. There's a folder called doc, and right in there there's a document here, which is the ODBC reporting guide. And I'm going to use this attributes with data types report. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in. And when I was actually playing with this earlier, I realized that they have a syntax error in here. They forgot to put that character right in there. They just changed the name of this materialized view. So just put that @ sign in there if you are following along at home. And I'm going to execute this query. And there we go. So I want to point something out here. So the first thing we see is we're starting to see a report that we want to look at here. We have our entity names. We have attribute names in some cases, and we have our data types. So pretty useful report. There is an issue here. You'll see that in some cases, I'm actually using domains that use mapped values. So I don't want to see these mapped values. I want to see the explicit string name of those. That could be very difficult to understand or to kind of figure out the syntax for that, but there's a very simple solution. And this goes back to what I mentioned before. There's a function. It's just TRAN, like transform, open parentheses, close parentheses, around the value you'd like to transform. So this is a.name, which is the attribute name. I'm just going to put tran on there. And let me rerun the exact same query again, just with this new modification. And now here are my customer address, customer city, etc. Much more user-friendly names, obviously. So this is the first way that we can actually run a report here within the context of the ODBC editor. And now the ability we have here, so we've generated this. If you want a tabular report of this, you're like, oh, I'd love to be able to, put this in Excel or something like that. You can actually just save results set as CSV, which is this option up here in the upper right. And that's it. You can actually just save this as my results. .csv. I'll just save that on my desktop for now. And now, of course, you'd have this tabular report in a CSV file, which you can then open in Excel or any other tool that you need to open that information in. So that's the first method of generating these. Now, you can use this, by the way, in Excel. You can use this exact same query in Excel to generate this report by adding this, connecting to the data source and running this report. And this is the exact same method we use within the context of the Crystal Reports developer tool itself. So let me show you that very quickly. I probably should have saved that query, but that's okay. We can always just copy and paste it again. From the Tools menu, this time, rather than running one of the pinned reports, we're going to do Crystal Reports Developer. I'm going to click there. That's going to launch the developer tool. It usually looks for updates or something at the beginning here, so it can be like a bit of a pain. But actually, it's just asking me to upgrade. But other than that, we just get the main page here. So I'm just going to make this as simple as possible. I'm just going to do File, New, Blank Report. And now I have to specify what data source I want to use. I'm going to use Irwin current, or Irwin R8 current, which is, once again, what the current diagram in Irwin R8 is. This is the schema we want to be referencing, or the data source, I should say. And I'm going to add command. So I do add command. I push that over to the right. As soon as I try to add it, it says, what is the SQL that I want to make a command for? So I'm going to paste this. Now, this is the same query that I pasted from the within the Irwin editor. So I've already made my modifications here. I already did a little transform on the attribute name, for example. And I just click OK. So I see the command button here. I click OK again. And I see my blank report. And I see my Field Explorer. Now, this is pretty simple. What I see here in my Field Explorer is the actual result set, those 3 columns that I got back from running that SQL query. So let's bring the entity name over. I'm going to drop it into the details column here. And you'll see that in the page header, I automatically enters this entity name. This is just a header field. I can rename it if I'd like. And let's take a look at the SQL. I'm going to go from the View menu. I'm going to preview the sample. I'll just do all records here. And then here we go. Here are my entity names. I'm going to drag the attribute name in here as well. And there's my attribute name. And I'm going to drag in my data type as well. And there's my data type. Now what you're seeing here is, once again, we're seeing a tabular report. It's just a black and white, pretty straightforward. But now imagine that we're using the full features that are available within Crystal. You've created a template. You have like your company logo. You've created groups for your entities and attributes with definition properties, etc. And you've built that template. And now you could just simply drag and drop the fields where you want them to be, and they're going to be formatted into that template format. So we don't have time right now to actually build a template file. Although I'll show you how you can edit an existing one of the ones that come with Irwin in just a moment. But I kind of just at this point just want to show you very straightforward, how can I just generate a report pretty simply just by taking the command that literally is just a query that I copied from the documentation. I pasted it in here as a SQL command. It's giving me the columns that get returned, and then I'm just dragging and dropping them into my report. If the report is more, grouped into different levels, if you have like a bookmark and stuff like that, you can actually go far beyond this simple reporting that I'm showing you here. But I'm just trying to keep things as simple as possible for now. But you can see how useful this is to quickly generate a tabular report. Now, the next thing I'd like to show you, and I'm just looking at my notes here to make sure I'm covering all the topics I'd like to show everybody here. So the next option I'd like to show you actually is let's do a very similar report, but this time we're going to build it from within Crystal, from scratch. I'm going to use a blank report again rather than using any of the older templates. Let's make it as simple as possible. Once again, Irwin R8 current. And now what you'll see here is I can actually have access. Now, rather than doing the add command like we did previously, I'm actually going to navigate around the properties that exist or the objects that exist within this data source. There's all the schemas I mentioned before, the diagram, the current diagram. I can generate that. I can actually embed that in the diagram simply by adding this, the image file itself. I can do my activity log, of course, which is the AL schema. But what we're really looking at here is going to be the M0 schema. And it's going to be very a simple, straightforward report we're going to generate here. We're going to generate our, we need to include our entities. Let's look for entities. Here they are, entity. And I want to include my attributes. And I keep going back to this attribute entity because when you think about it, I mean, this is really going to be the starting point for almost all of your reports. There's other examples where you can have like attribute and domain interface as well, like different behaviors. We like to see the relationship between those. But there are other options you can run as well. But we're going to the attribute and entity relationship is usually going to be a starting point for many, many different reports you may have. Now, you'll notice since I'm actually interfacing directly with these schemas, I actually have this links tab, which I didn't see before when I built the command. If I click on links, you're going to see something interesting, which is the tool is going to presume a relationship between the objects. Sometimes this is wrong, by the way, so you may want to come in here and make sure it's joining correctly. But you'll notice that in this case, it's actually correct. It's actually building a join between the owner of the attribute and the ID of the entity. So this is actually the correct relationship. If I click on this relationship line and I look at the link options, we can actually see that this is going to be an inner join with equal condition, but you can actually make this a different condition, like not equal, for example. But we're going to make an inner join from attribute owner to entity ID. So this presumed relationship is correct in the links tab, so I don't have to do anything at all. I just want to introduce that, if you do have lots of different stored, or I should say, data sources here, that you can actually go and build those relationships as required, to your specifications. So we're back on the data tab again. I'm just going to click OK once again. And when I go to the Field Explorer this time, I'm going to see many more available fields here. I'm going to see everything that's available within the entity metadata and everything within the attribute metadata. So let's start building a report. Rather than doing the same report I just generated before, let's take a look at building a table and column. So we want to look at those physical names. So there's a nice little feature right within entity. You actually have user formatted name and user formatted physical name. So let's say, for example, that you're using macros like we were seeing before. You had to use that tran to get the strings to map the way you like them to. If you use these values instead, it will already contain the values the way you'd like to see them. So I'm actually going to take this user formatted physical name. I'm going to put that into my details. I'm going to rename this header to just be, let's call it table name. And once again, I'm going to go and do a print preview. I'm just going to see all of my tables. Pretty straightforward so far. Now let's take a look at attribute properties. I'm going to take my attribute, once again, user formatted physical name. And that's going to take a minute. Oh, I put that in the wrong field. I'm just doing Control-Z, by the way, because I messed that up. Control-C, undo like you would expect to see. And I copied it into the wrong level. So I actually want to put that at the details level. There we go. So that is the physical names with the underscores, of course, of the columns in those tables. I'm once again going to rename this. I'm going to make this rather than, by default, you'll probably notice already that what you're seeing is whatever the value is that you're dragging over, the metadata tag itself is going to populate there. But I'm going to make this a more useful name, turning it into column name. I'm going to shrink this down. The field doesn't need to be that wide. It's tables, that seems to be, oh, let me drag that over to, okay. And let's add, oh, we saw this previously, but let's add even more information here, something that's more useful for us. Let's say, for example, I want to include my data types as well. So let me go to my physical data type. So I'm going to drag that over here as well. And now that'll populate as well. I'm going to slightly modify this to just be data type. I guess I can make this closer to my other one just to give myself enough room here, because I do want to add one more property here. This can be shorter. Title can be dragged over. And lastly, let me take a look at, I do want to show everybody this one last point, which is my null option. So now, dragging my null option over. Now, a couple of points I want to make here. One is that notice that because I'm, rather than using that query like we did before, the fact that I'm actually working from the schema objects themselves gives me a lot more flexibility. I could just keep adding properties if I wanted to. Or let's say that I had already created my table and column names, and then I could just easily come here and just drag in data type, just drag in null option, et cetera, and just keep building on that if I'd want to. That's the first thing I want to point out. Second thing I want to point out here is notice that the null option is showing the 0 and 1 value. Now, this is not a value that this is not really useful for my audience. You know, those values represent null or not null, but I wanted to actually say null, not null. So how do I get that to happen? So the way I do that, there's a very convenient way of doing this. I go to SQL expression fields. I'm going to create a new SQL expression field. I'm going to call that null option. I'm going to click OK. And then I end up in my SQL editor. Now, there's a lot of things you can do here. I mean, this is a fully, you can create conditions. This is basically Visual Basic. So you have the ability of creating all these different conditions. So you might say, if the value is this or within this range, et cetera. There's a lot of complexity here. But we're going to do something very, very, very simple, which is simply to use the tran syntax that we introduced previously against the attribute null option, if I can find it. Null option type. I'm just going to drag that right in between the open and close parentheses here. You'll see it's fully delineated here, attribute.null option type, so it knows exactly what it is. I'm going to exit out of here. Do you want to save changes? Yes, I do. And now I have the null option here as an available column in my SQL expressions. So I'm going to drag that value into my report. And we'll see there what I want to see, which is I'm seeing nulls where there are zeros. I'm going to see not null where there's 1. And given that, I can now just delete this other column. I don't need it anymore. So there we go. So pretty quickly able to generate, my table, column, data type, null option, etc. So, this is not that hard to build initially, but much more importantly, I can save this and rerun it. And of course, as I rerun it, whatever the current model is, because remember, this is running against Irwin R8 current, the live model. Every time I run this, depending on the model that's open, I can generate any of these reports on demand. So I have to build it once, rerun it as many times as I like. Once you build a report, by the way, the actual, this is back in the Irwin software now, these pinned reports that are executing here are executing, oh, I see we're very short on time. So the pinned reports that are running here are actually in a folder called pinned reports within the Irwin install folder. So the fact that they're available here so you can run it right within the tools menu is because they exist there. So as you start building, a group or reusable reports that you use on a regular basis, you can actually start and as you build these up, you can actually save them into that same folder, and then they will become available as a pinned report inside of Irwin. So I probably do not have time to show you a trick with the bulk editor. We might have to save that for the next webinar. But I do want to show you a couple of things before we wrap up. And I also want to leave us some time for questions, although we're probably short on that. So the last things I'd like to mention here before we move on is that you can, with the pinned reports like I mentioned before, if you take any reports that you've built already, you want to reuse them, save them into the folder called pinned reports, and they'll be available here from this pull-down menu. Your recent reports, of course, as you run them, are all available here. The model manager reports. So if you're connected to the model manager, and let me connect to my model manager quickly to show you this populated value here. If you are using the model manager and you'd like to use your, you'd like to run like global reports against the model manager, you can actually run these here as well. So for example, if I want to see my library model and entities report, I can just click that here as well. And this is just coming up. It does take a minute to generate this. The model manager is relatively large, so we're going to see a pretty big report here. So here we go. So here we have our library. So once again, this is has groups in it. So we have our library, the model name, and then the entities. And then if I scroll through this and go to the next page, for example, there's 81 pages here. So there's a lot of models in this model manager. And once again, we have this model is the AdventureWorks model, some entities, aliasing, etc. So these are all the entities inside there. So if you do want to use this with the model manager, you do have the ability, and you see, of course, we have like a bookmark here so we can navigate to each one of these. Now, let's say that you like this format, you like the way this is done, but you want to add a couple more properties to it. So you actually want to use this as your starting point. You want to build from scratch. So within the Crystal Reports viewer, you go to Edit, Edit Design. That's going to put you back in Crystal Reports. And now this is actually the report here. So you see it doesn't look like much here at all. But what it actually has is you see like we have this library group. It might be hard to see in the screen because of the strange coloring that they use. But this is group 1. And it's library. This is group 2, which is model, and then here's our entity. So if I have this formatting here, you might like this formatting, you want to use it for other things, you definitely can do that. You simply go into your into your editor here, and you can actually just drag and drop the fields as you see fit. You can either edit, you can even edit this command, which is what's generating these columns, and we can actually go here and edit this. And once we edit it, I'm not sure why it's not allowing me to edit here now. But once it's editing here, it's trying to connect to my model manager. That's probably why it's taking a long time to do so. But this command itself would allow you to, for example, query different model manager properties, and that's my connection to my model manager. So rather than wasting your time with trying to connect to my model manager and generating this query again, the reason I wanted to introduce is simply to say that, like, let's say we wanted to use the same exact formatting, but we want to add a couple more properties. Maybe I want definitions on my entities. I can then connect to my repository and retrieve that as well. Modify the query to include those properties. So you see, this is what my problem here is. I have to see, here's my database here. And I can put my user ID and my password, etc. And then once I have this populated correctly and connected to my repository, I can modify the command SQL, include the properties I'd like to include in the report, and then slightly modify this. So the reason I mention this is the fact that these reports that are included with Irwin allow you to, and here's the report generated again, but what it actually allows you to do is to run these reports and actually use existing reports to actually reuse them, I should say, just to make modifications to existing properties. And then if you like the formatting, et cetera, you can actually include those properties in the future as well. So I think that pretty much covers the demos that I wanted to show you, aside from the bulk editor demonstration, which I'll probably have to save for the next topic, which is going to be primarily around the bulk editor. But I do want to show you, for example, here we've generated that same subject area report. And just similarly, as I was mentioning before, we do an edit design. Once again, it opens up in Crystal Reports. And this is the Crystal Reports developer. And we see this is actually the object. This is actually the graphical object is embedded here. It's the current underscore diagram. And we have a grouping here around the names. And similarly, as I mentioned before, you can actually update these properties by just modifying the command to include more, and then drag and drop them into the report as necessary. So my takeaway from that, the main takeaway from all that, is that you can use these to generate new reports as you go forward, or just update the existing reports to update them. So let me just wrap things up, and then we can take a couple questions if we have any. So in conclusion, the Irwin, you have read-only access to the Irwin metadata using the ODBC friendly tool within Irwin. Every copy of Irwin comes with the Crystal Reports built in, a developer edition of it, as well as just the bundled version that you can run from your pinned reports that come included with the Irwin software. Mastering your Crystal software can provide much more flexibility in building your reports and allow you to have those reusable reports in the future. And you could save those reports as templates for easy reusability. Now, there's going to be an advanced Crystal Reports webinar, which I want to discuss that I wanted to mention. It's probably not until July, because we're going to have an MDM webinar coming next month. But you have the ability of joining multiple results. So one of the key features here, now that I've kind of introduced those editors, now start to imagine that rather than having like that one command with just those one subset of objects, imagine you're joining results from multiple reports that you're connecting to two different ODBC sources, for example, and then doing a join across multiple data sources. You can build parameters in groups, like I mentioned before. So you can actually have groups where you might want to have the structure where you want to have subject areas and then entities and then definitions on attributes, for example. You can have those groupings selected, and parameters. So when we had that one report, the subject area report, and you were prompted to enter those values, these are more advanced. It's much more complicated to build something like that than that simply tabular report I showed you today. But if you get familiar with this level of the reporting, it's not that hard to take the leap into that more flexible reporting. Creating interactive templates that you can use against multiple models. Embedding graphical objects, which I didn't include here, but that's another option that we can do as well. And you could use that current diagram image embedded in the reports as well. And you can do that. You don't have to just use the Irwin canned reports to do that. And then, of course, launching those custom reports from within Irwin as software as well. So it's coming in July, so I look forward to that. But get comfortable around this limited version of what we've shown today, and be ready for that next step in the process. So if you want to follow me, also check out if you don't want to wait till July for all this, by the way, check out my blog. They'll probably be posting most of these exercises on there as I'm developing them over the next few weeks. My blog is maximumdatamodeling.blogspot.com. Follow me at Twitter, which is twitter.com/maxdatamodeling, not maximum. There's not enough characters there. And then on LinkedIn, just do a search for Maximum Data Modeling. You can join our group, and you'll get announcements when there's new blog posts, new webinars, etc. And you can email me, ca.erwin@programmers.com. So with that, I think we're done, and we're ready for any questions we might have.
All right. Is Model Manager required to do what the speaker is presenting, or does it apply to the client modeler as well?
No, this is just with the Irwin software. There's no need for the Model Manager.
Okay. Can you show us ODBC set up on a machine which does not have Irwin but is in the same network, or is it must to have Irwin on machine where we want these reports? The
Irwin ODBC will only work with Irwin installed on your local PC. There's no method of accessing the Irwin metadata via the client, to extract the model metadata via the ODBC unless you have Irwin actually running. There are workarounds. If you have a model manager, if you do use the model manager, which is not required for any of these exercises, by the way, but if you do have the model manager, then the metadata is actually stored in that repository. So in that case, you could access it with Crystal Reports or Excel or any other ODBC editor, access that metadata, and generate a report from there. And check out my blog. I actually have an example of where we're just running right into SQL a query that extracts metadata from the repository. But in that case, you absolutely would have to have the Irwin, the model manager, I should say, installed, or the workgroup edition as it's called now. You could not do that with a standalone model.
What if you want to share your developed reports with everyone, not just from our own pinned reports folder, and then where's the Irwin meta model ERD again?
Check out my blog post. The ERD diagram is inside of the samples folder. If you go to my blog, you have the full path there. But if you want to just give you a specification of where it is, if you go to the install folder, there's a folder called backup files, and in there there's a folder called samples, and in there is the model that you're looking for. So that's the one that shows you the metadata relationship between all those different schema objects. So that's one method. And what was the first part of the question again?
What if you want to share your developed reports with everyone, not just from our own pinned reports folder?
Oh, then you would just save it. Like, there's two options there. One is if it's in the pinned report folder, like I said before, if you want to take the results set, you have the option to do a save as PDF. If you want to take the report that you've generated and you want to hand it off to somebody else, the actual the report, the Crystal Reports developed application or whatever, the report itself, you can actually just go into the pinned reports folder and it's right in there. So if you just want to share it with somebody that way, they don't have to have Irwin installed if you want to just share the file itself with them.
You're going to tell us how to get the reports in HTML format?
Yes, the HTML format. Let me show you very quickly while I have you here. I did overlook that during our demonstration. But the way you do that is once you're in, here's my result set that I just built before. This has more option sets than in that viewer version that I showed you before. This is the full development version. Once again, this is just Irwin installed. Everybody who has Irwin has this installed on their PC. You use export, and then you can do export report. And you'll notice that by default, it's like an RPT file. But of course, you have the option to save it as an HTML. You can also save it to XML, by the way, if you want to save it as XML, as a CSV, etc.
Does Irwin 8.0 still include the report template builder in the data browser, and are the user-defined properties available for reporting?
The Irwin 8 does not include the report template builder, and it does not include the data browser. The data browser has been replaced with the bulk editor, and the bulk editor is a more advanced version of the data browser that gives you the ability of not only reporting on the metadata, but actually updating and even exporting the reports, making modifications outside of Irwin, and then bringing them into the tool to update the model itself, which is something that data browser never allowed. So from the data browser perspective, you want to look at the bulk editor. from the point of view of the report template builder is not included anymore. The graphical reporting has to be done through Crystal Reports, but your UDP properties are reportable from multiple methods. A, it's reportable from within the bulk editor if you want a tabular report, and B, it's something you can report using the Crystal Reports or the ODBC queries that we saw earlier today.
Can you update Crystal Reports with Model Navigator?
I believe so. I don't think that, yes, I believe, yes, you can. You definitely can. The developer component, which is the part that allows you to modify the reports, is standard within the Irwin install, and that includes Navigator, because Navigator basically is, at this point with the new release, it simply is Irwin with the save model options disabled. But the Navigator does allow you to make modifications to the Crystal reports as well.
How would we report on all the diagrams within a model in one step, given that we don't have model mart?
You mean like multiple? I assume you mean like multiple diagrams or subject areas with the new syntax. Right now, you'd have to build them one diagram at a time, or you can build for graphical reporting. Now, this is from the point of view of graphical reporting. You can generate multiple tabular reports from it. Just you have to be a little clever with the way you code the ODBC query or the way you build it within Crystal. But now, from a graphical point of view, right now you can only embed one image at a time, so you'd have to run it multiple times on different diagrams. That's something that's going to be changed. That DGM object that allows you to run the current diagram is going to include within the next release or so, you're going to have the ability of generating multiple diagrams within that same editor. So basically what it means is that this is going to be added within the next release or so, but it's not in the current release. Right now it's one diagram at a time.
Are there any pre-built Crystal reports available online that we can use as a starting point?
The ones there's a whole bunch of them. There's about 40 or 50 of them that are the ones that are in the pinned reports folder, the ones that come right out of the box in Irwin, and you can use those as your starting point. If you just want generic Crystal reports, you can definitely go online, and the Crystal Reports website actually has a really active user forum where you can get some generic templates, like if you don't want to use the Irwin ones. But if you want to build off of the Irwin ones, like maybe you like those reports, but you want to like include your corporate logo rather than the CA corporate logo, you can easily modify what's already there. Once again, just run one of the pinned reports and then click the design button, and that'll put you right in the designer, and you can start making your modifications.
All right, and I'm not sure exactly what this is referring to, but can you simulate a report builder table and column CSV export with this tool?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You could.
And this person wants to know if the developed reports can be put in a central location and then expose them to any Irwin user.
Yes, when you save them, I mean, if you want to save them as PDFs, for example, you can put them in a shared drive so everybody can access them. Or when you actually use it, like I mentioned right here at the very end, when you do the save as, or I should say export, to HTML, I think I lost control of that, but when you do the export as HTML, it's okay. When you do the export as HTML, you have the ability of saving them to a shared drive or publishing them, really. And then, of course, if you always keep publishing to the same URL, you will allow everybody to just use one reference to those objects. So that's a long way of saying, yes, you can do that. Okay, we actually need the room for another meeting, so we're going to wrap things up for now. And Kevin?
Thank you, Victor. Anybody who has questions for Victor can email them to him at ca.erwin@programmers.com or visit our website at www.programmers.com/ca. Victor's blogs, if he hasn't mentioned it before, are maximumdatamodeling.blogspot.com. He's also on Twitter at maxdatamodeling and also maximumdatamodeling on linkedin.com. So look forward to our next webinar, which will take place next month, and we thank you for your time this afternoon.